Welcome to the Power and Excellence podcast.
Hello and welcome. This is indeed the Power and Excellence podcast, and I am your host, Dr. John. Today we're delving into a deeply important psychological concept that affects millions of people around the world in all aspects of life. So thank you for joining me today as we explore learned helplessness.
You're listening to the Power and Excellence podcast with Dr. John.
It's a feeling of powerlessness, often learned through repeated failures or negative experiences in relationships, at work, or even in everyday tasks. Learned helplessness can prevent us from taking action even when we know we have the ability to improve our circumstances. In today's episode, we'll explore the psychology behind learned helplessness, share some real-life stories to illustrate its effects, and most importantly, we'll discuss some strategies that we can use to help us break free from its grip once and for all. So let's kick off by defining what learned helplessness actually is. The concept was first introduced in the 1960s by psychologist Martin Seligman, and he discovered that animals, when repeatedly exposed to painful or uncomfortable situations that they couldn't escape, eventually stopped trying to avoid those situations, even when escape became possible. Seligman found that these animals learned to be helpless. The story goes that in a circus, an adult elephant is tied to a small wooden stake in the ground by a simple rope, and despite its size and absolute strength, the elephant doesn't even try to break free. Why? Well, because as a baby elephant, it was tied to a much bigger stake with a much stronger rope, and at that time it wasn't strong enough to break free. Over time, the baby elephant stops trying altogether, believing that escape is impossible. And even now, as an adult with much greater might behind it, it still believes that it is unable to uproot the stake. In humans, the idea is very similar. When we face repeated challenges or failures that feel beyond our control, we may begin to feel powerless to change our circumstances. And this can happen in a variety of contexts. It can happen at work, at school, in relationships. It can even happen in our health. And over time, this mindset can lead to depression, anxiety, and a general feeling of hopelessness. So, to better understand this, let's take a look at a couple of real-life examples. I want to tell you about Janet, a professional who spent years in a toxic environment. Early in her career, she had an ambitious spirit and a real desire to grow. She really wanted to explore her career, and she knew that she had the mental ability and the intellect to do it. But every time she took initiative, her boss would either ignore her or criticize her efforts for just whatever reasons he could come up with at that time. After years of trying and failing to make an impact, Janet stopped taking risks, stopped making an effort, stopped going the extra mile, and eventually just began to do the bare minimum. In fact, when offered a promotion years later, she turned it down. She turned it down because she believed that she was incapable of excelling in a higher position. Janet had learned through repeated failure and criticism that her efforts were futile. So what's happening in the brain when we experience learned helplessness? When we repeatedly encounter situations where our actions don't affect the outcome, our brains start to reinforce the idea that we're powerless. Neuroscientific research shows that prolonged exposure to uncontrollable stress can lead to changes in the brain, particularly in the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, both of which are responsible for emotional regulation and decision-making. Essentially, the brain adapts to this feeling of helplessness and begins to expect failure in similar situations. We've now wandered into the territory of confirmation bias. So because we think we're going to fail, we start looking for failure. And sometimes we might even self-sabotage to make sure that we fail, just to prove to ourselves that we're not worthy, that what we have learned in the past is real. This is also linked to depression, where individuals feel as though no amount of effort will improve their situation. Seligman's later research found that people who develop learned helplessness are much more likely to experience clinical depression and anxiety because they stop believing in their own ability to influence their circumstances. Another important psychological factor at play here is attribution theory. People who experience learned helplessness often internalize failure. They believe that it's due to their own personal flaws. For example, I'm not good enough. I'm just bad at this. I'm not smart enough. And simultaneously, on the other hand, they tend to attribute success to external factors such as luck or other people's skills, other people's abilities. They were successful because they're good. I wasn't successful because I'm not as good. And this mindset reinforces that cycle of helplessness. And if you believe that success is beyond your control and that failure is inevitable, you're less likely to take risks and seize new opportunities. Because you're now looking for failure, you're no longer looking for success. And this can be a real cycle of failure and a real cycle of anxiety. So now that we somewhat understand a little bit of the science behind learned helplessness, let's talk about how it manifests itself in everyday life. So here are just a few examples of different areas in life where it might show up. In education, some students experience learned helplessness. Repeated failures or struggles in certain subjects, especially like maths and science, can lead students to believe that they're simply not good at those subjects. Over time, they stop trying, and their performance declines even further. I have experienced this. I remember as a student in my early teens, my maths teacher telling me and the rest of the class that we were hopeless cases. We would never amount to anything. We would never be able to do any kind of maths because we just weren't good enough. And you know what happened? We gave up. We stopped listening, we started just playing around, messing around. And it took a while for us to learn, actually, no, this isn't going to help us at all. And collectively, we did make a change, but it wasn't easy. And many students experience this. In working environments, similar to the story that we heard about Janet just now, learned helplessness can emerge in toxic or rigid work environments. Employees who feel that their efforts go unnoticed or are constantly criticized can become disengaged, contributing less and feeling incapable of advancement. And I think this is probably one of the most expensive areas where learned helplessness has a very negative effect. Imagine you're a business owner or a manager or you're a shareholder in a company, and the great pool of talent that is available within that organization, and some of it is being stifled because somebody somewhere is creating a toxic environment. Somebody somewhere is not allowing people to explore their brilliance by just teaching them, showing them, allowing them to learn incorrectly that they aren't capable. And I think that is a real corporate sin. Another area it might show up is in personal relationships, and we see this again. We see this very often. People who have experienced rejection, emotional or physical abuse, or neglect in any kind of personal way may develop learned helplessness in this area. And they may stop trying to form close bonds or assume that future relationships will end in failure no matter what they do. They also assume sometimes that future relationships are going to adopt the same pattern as past relationships. So when we see people, and we often ask ourselves, why is that person going around and round from one bad relationship to the next bad relationship? Well, part of that is because they have learned to be helpless. They have learned that that is what relationships mean. And because they bounce from one bad relationship to the next, their confirmation bias kicks in and they prove to themselves, they show themselves, absolutely, this is all I'm worth. You see, this is all I'm capable of. It's all down to me. The fourth area that we might see learned helplessness creeping in is in our health. And yes, it can even affect our physical health. People struggling with chronic illnesses or weight management, for example, might start to believe that no matter what they do, their health won't improve. And this can lead to people avoiding healthy behaviors like exercising or following medical advice or cutting down or eating more healthily, for example. You have no idea. If I had a penny for every single time that I've heard somebody say, John, I've tried everything. I've tried everything to get fit. I've tried everything to lose weight. But what happens here is we try maybe for a little bit, and if we don't see immediate results, right, because that's what people want these days, we want to see immediate results, well, we tell ourselves, you see, I told you I wasn't good. I told you I was rubbish at it. We didn't get fat overnight. We didn't become unfit overnight. Those are things that we had to take time to achieve. So it's unlikely that we're going to achieve the reversal of that overnight as well. But unfortunately, when we don't achieve that instant gratification, this again leads into our confirmation bias that, you see, I'm just not good. So as we can see, learned helplessness doesn't just stay in one part of our life. It can spill over into multiple areas, making individuals feel stuck, disempowered, and just overall hopeless and helpless. But the good news is that there are ways to overcome learned helplessness. We can break free. It's not a permanent state. With a little bit of effort and with the right strategies, we can regain control over our lives and our mindsets. So I've come up with 6 little tips for today that will help us to overcome that learned helplessness. And the first step is recognizing the pattern. The first step is awareness, acknowledging that we're stuck, acknowledging that you're experiencing learned helplessness and being able to step back and recognize it for what it is. This involves reflecting on areas of your life that sometimes is a little bit uncomfortable. Right? It forces us to take a look at parts of our lives where we may be feeling powerless and forces us to ask ourselves whether our actions, or perhaps lack of them, are real. Are they based on past experiences rather than our current reality? So by taking that step back and asking ourselves, am I bringing my past into my present? Am I assuming that today is the same as yesterday? Or is today really the same as yesterday? Or am I looking at the past and bringing that into my present, saying, well, you see, that's what's been going on in the past, therefore that must be what's going on in the future. Taking that step outside and asking ourselves, is this real? It can take a lot of self-awareness, and sometimes it can be painful, but that first step of being aware is the first step to beating learned helplessness. The next step is to change our mindset, and we can do this on our own, or we can do this through cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And CBT is a very well-researched method for challenging negative thought patterns. And with CBT, we can learn to identify and reframe thoughts like, I'll never succeed, or I'm not good enough. Instead of thinking, I've always failed at this, we can begin to tell ourselves, actually, I can do better at this. If I didn't get what I wanted, it just means that there's something I did that I shouldn't have done, or something that I didn't do that I should have done. That first step of recognizing the pattern, and then the second step of reframing that and saying, if I'm not getting what I want, let me do something else. This is a phrase that I use with clients all the time. If what you're doing isn't giving you what you want, then it's time to do something else. It's time to change. Failure is a myth. All it means is that you haven't done something, or you've done something that you shouldn't have done. It's only feedback. So once we start reframing this situation and saying, right, okay, well, I didn't get what I wanted, what does that mean? It means that it's time to improve, it's time to adopt a different strategy, try something else, change something. And it can be the smallest thing sometimes. It can be just doing something very small, like taking a walk around the block. And this is the step 3. Step 3 of changing our pattern here is to set small, achievable goals. So In step 2, we're shifting our mindset. We're taking a look at how we can change our strategy. And in step 3, we might say, okay, I'm going to change my strategy and I'm going to try something small just to see how it goes. Because one of the reasons that people feel helpless is that they set goals that are too high, or they expect immediate and instant gratification and immediate success. When we break tasks down into smaller, manageable steps that we can achieve, success in these smaller goals can really help to build our confidence and really counteract the feelings of helplessness. And it might just be, if I'm trying to get in shape, I'm trying to improve my health, it might just be taking a walk around the block. It might be forgoing that glass of wine, or not having the fries with the burger. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Setting small, achievable goals teaches us and shows us, hey, you know what? I'm actually better at this than I thought. I can make decisions, and I am in control of myself, and I am in control of my thoughts, and I am in control of what I do. So setting those small but achievable goals is absolutely critical. Step 4 is one that we're all pretty bad at, I think. Step 4 is practicing self-compassion. Many people trapped in learned helplessness are very harsh on themselves. Developing a little bit of self-compassion involves treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer to a friend in the same situation. When I ask people, what are the 5 or 10 things about yourself that you least like? People come up with a list. In fact, if I ask them to name 5 things, oftentimes I get 10, 15, 20. But when I ask them, what are the things that you really like about yourself? What are the traits that you're really proud of? What are the things in yourself that you value? People might come up with 1 or 2, and sure, some of it is because they're being bashful or modest, but it's actually more difficult for us to come up with things that we like about ourselves. But if I ask them to say the same things about their friends or their family, give me 5 things that you really love or appreciate in your friend or your spouse or your partner, people find it very easy. Developing self-compassion can be quite hard, but it helps us to let go of that self-blame and recognize that setbacks are normal. Setbacks are okay. They're part of the learning process. Failure is a myth. There is no failure, there's only feedback. However you want to look at it, recognize that part of that process of getting better is to forgive yourself and say, you know what, you are pretty awesome. And we are. We're all awesome. We're all fantastic. We all have tremendous attributes. And recognizing that and telling yourself, hey, you know what? You're pretty damn cool. That's not something that we do often enough. But this shift can help us to be better people, can help us to get over this situation of learned helplessness and be a real pivotal part of that learning process. The next step, step number 5, again, we're not terribly good at this. This is about seeking support. Sometimes breaking out of learned helplessness means that we need a helping hand. We need somebody else, somebody to just give us that push or show us a different perspective. And it doesn't matter whether it's a therapist, a coach, or just a friend that you trust, but having somebody else there to provide some guidance, some encouragement, can make a huge difference. And they can help you see different perspectives and provide the emotional support that you need to push through the tough times. Bouncing ideas around with somebody else, sharing perspectives, recognizing that, hey, you know what? Just because they said it doesn't necessarily make it right, but let's talk it through. Let's explore those alternative perspectives, and maybe together we'll come up with a different perspective. Maybe somebody else will force me to look at things from a different perspective. Is that really how it occurred? Or is that just how you think it occurred? Because that feeds in to your confirmation bias. Other people, like I say, it can be a therapist, a coach, a trusted friend. And it has to be a trusted friend, right? You don't want somebody to just nod in agreement with you all the time. This has to be somebody that you trust enough to be able to push back a wee bit. Somebody that you trust enough to give you some pushback and force you to think about things from a different perspective. Right? So, step 5, seeking support. Step 6, learning problem-solving skills. People who feel helpless often struggle with this because we've learned that I'm incapable. We've learned that we can't do things. And so we start to give up. Just like the elephant, we give up. And by actively working on these skills, we can regain control over situations that maybe once felt overwhelming. And if we go back to step 5, and we think that maybe with the help of somebody else, this is something that we can start to explore. This can involve learning techniques like brainstorming potential solutions, evaluating their pros and cons with other people, and then taking action on the best option. And it might well be that the best option was one that we knew from the start. It might be one that we discussed with our friend, our therapist, our coach, or whoever. But learning those problem-solving skills is a really important step, because now we're starting to learn, hey, I can make a difference. I am pretty good. I do know stuff, and I can take control. So let's just take a quick recap on these 6 steps. Step 1 is to recognize the pattern, being aware of our experiences of learned helplessness, and recognize that sometimes we're bringing those experiences into the present. We're bringing our past into the present. Recognizing the pattern means that we can now break the pattern. Step 2, shifting our mindset, reframing things. Reminding ourselves that just because I didn't succeed in the past doesn't mean I can't succeed in the future. You can begin to tell yourself that you can improve and you can try different things. Step 3, setting small and achievable goals. Once we know that we can achieve things, once we know that we can be successful, this counteracts the feelings of helplessness and changes how we approach things. Step 4, practicing self-compassion, remembering that we are all awesome, we're all fantastic, we're all perfect. This can help you to shift the blame from yourself to the situation and say, just because that happened doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Setbacks are normal and they're part of the learning process. Step 5, seek support. You don't have to do this on your own. Nobody said that. That's never in the rules. You can get help from wherever you want. A therapist, a coach, a friend, doesn't matter. Get somebody to help you. Get somebody to help you push through the tough times. Step 6 is learn problem-solving skills. By actively working on these skills, you can regain control over your situations and start to feel like you can make a difference. So, learned helplessness can feel like a cage. It can feel like a trap. It can feel overwhelming and insurmountable. But it's not true. It's not true. Learned helplessness is a mindset. That's all it is. It's made up. It's not real. It's something that other people have told us. It's something that we've taught ourselves over the years. But it's made up. Remember that the feeling of helplessness is a learned experience. It's a learned response. It's not an inherent trait. You weren't born being helpless. You weren't born feeling like that. You've learned it over the years. And by recognizing it and reframing our thoughts, taking small but steady action, we can break free from the cycle of learned helplessness.
Power and Excellence with Dr. John.
Well, that's it for me for this episode of the Power and Excellence podcast, but thank you very much indeed for joining me on this journey to better understand learned helplessness. If this episode has resonated with you, or if you think somebody you know might benefit from it, well, please feel free to share it with them. And remember to subscribe and like the Power and Excellence podcast, and never miss another deep dive into the world of psychology and personal growth. Until next time, look after yourselves and remember, you have more power than you think. Bye-bye.
You're listening to the Power and Excellence podcast with Dr. John.